Right. So we will talk about that because banners become placeholders, right? And this is my joke about why I love being Methodist. It's like having a gym membership. You don't actually have to go, right? Part of why I like being the member of a Methodist church is that because I'm Methodist, I don't actually have to follow Jesus or do the methods. That's sort of my joke, right? Because I'm in. I have a membership card. And so that's a banner. Is being a Methodist can be a banner. You don't actually have to do the things that made people Methodists in the original days, and that can drift historically. Yeah. Hiking. For the second half of the conversation, but I do want to pick up on some of the stuff that we put on these pieces of paper last week and to frame our conversation. So question one was, do you remember before 9/11? So if anybody wasn't here last week, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything that pops into your mind. Do you remember what things were like before 9/11? And we talked about our biggest challenges or the biggest changes since then. Anybody else have something you want to contribute?
I would say we have.
That's really good. Wow, well said. Yeah, next week we're going to talk about our Bible and how it is a narrative from the very beginning that our origin myth, our origin story, our epic, has blame and violence built into it. So, and favoritism, right off the bat, us versus them, right at the beginning.
We're the chosen.
Yeah. Because you are reading the book, I want to honor that. And so I want to go through some great, what I think are some great quotes from the book and talk about them. So on page 28, Fitch, our author, says, whenever a distinctive belief becomes extracted from everyday life, from real life discernment in the spirit, and it becomes an identity marker, it can be used to set up one side against another. So you and I have inherited these labels and tags. It's how we know if somebody is us or them. And we do it almost second nature, right? It's almost like ingrained in us. And so naming these things becomes really important because if they're not named, they have power in their assumption. Because they're assumed and not stated, then they hold a power over us instead of us being in charge of them, right? Our categories take hold of us.
No filters going on.
So this is the banner conversation that had been brought up earlier. So he says, one sure tell that a distinctive has become a banner is that it stops referring to anything real that affects how we live on a day-to-day basis. Instead, it's now a symbol of who or what we are against. So does anything come to mind if we were to look in the mirror? Does anything come to mind?
Bumper stickers.
Bumper stickers? All right. Yeah. It's a way of letting people know this is what I'm about. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Bumper stickers can do that. Yeah. Or doesn't. Yeah. So in Fitch's earlier book, I've been looking forward to telling you this. It was called The End of Evangelicalism, ? He had this really interesting idea that he gets from this philosopher, this Zizek, that line of reasoning that we're going to talk about in a second. But he says when a boundary marker becomes detached from the value for which it was originally set up, in that school of thought it's called a master signifier. So it doesn't actually hold the power that it used to, but it just demarcates who's us and who's them. And that's sort of the danger. And so now I think he's refined this a little bit, and he's calling it a banner, which I think is helpful. So like, for instance, organ music is one of the things we were talking about, that when there's a drum set in the church, right, we say that we're not that kind of a church. We don't have a worship band, right? We might distinguish ourselves from that. But as Methodists, we were kicked out of the Anglican church partly because our worship was so enthusiastic. So we used to be the enthusiastic worshipers, But now we've become very refined and staid and traditional, right? And they are now the enthusiasts that we would be uncomfortable with. When we were on break from Sunday school in December, I tried to visit other churches. One of the churches that I went to, had very, very loud and lively music, which was fine, even though it was different than what we have here, and that wasn't a problem at all. It was that in between the songs, people were speaking in tongues all around me in the congregation, and that's a part of their worship expression, right? And it was a great challenge for me to be like, I'm so uncomfortable right now, right? The Word of God says that you have to interpret tongues. But anyway, that's not really what I was. But it was just because it was so different, and I was just thinking, like, I wonder what it's like if they were to visit us, and they'd be like, well, I mean, we sang, but it was like very, not very loud, and people weren't into it, and no one was in the spirit, right? It would be just a totally alienating experience. So I went there intentionally to try something new and to, see how that felt now that I've been distanced from it for this long. It was a really good experience for me. And it was more uncomfortable than I anticipated. So, because you can say, like, oh, we have to build bridges, right? Like in theory. But the actual bridge building of going in onto someone else's home field and playing by their rules, and right, it really does take a lot of trying to do that. It was more difficult than I anticipated. So here's the Zizek thing that John was talking about earlier, and I know the font's really small, so I'll read it. According to Zizek, prior to World War I, Coca-Cola was a medicine known as a nerve tonic, stimulant, and headache remedy. Then, during Prohibition, it was sweetened to make its strange taste more palatable. And it became a popular drink to replace alcohol because of its stimulant qualities. It was deemed refreshing as well as the perfect temperance drink. Then, in its modern version, its sugar was replaced with artificial sweetener, and its caffeine was extracted to take out the health negative ingredients. What we're left with is caffeine-free Diet Coke. Today, therefore, caffeine-free Diet Coke has become a drink that does not quench thirst and does not provide any stimulant effects, and whose strange taste is not particularly satisfying. Nonetheless, it's one of the most consumed beverages in the world. Right? And this is, for me, I think this is a really great example of when something changes over time and it no longer has the properties that made it distinct in the first place. It needs to be accounted for. That has to be attended to, because otherwise that historic drift, right, is concerning and it goes unchecked. This is why I'm always making fun of Methodists, right? If Methodists don't do the methods, then what makes us Methodists? The banner. We have a church sign. We're Methodists, right? But you don't do the methods. That's not the point. And to me, that's caffeine-free Diet Coke. It's not refreshing. It doesn't have any of the stuff that made it great in the first place. Why are you still drinking it?
So when you go before a bomb, you're going to say that?
I do say stuff like that.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
When you're actually...
Well, maybe. We'll see how the Spirit leads. I 100% agree that the Wesleyan Quadrilateral is probably our best inheritance. It's the thing, of all of our trinkets and artifacts, it is the thing that is still very useful and life-giving to me. The one thing I'm running into, by the way, with the Quadrilateral is that other Methodists will say, but if you use the Quadrilateral for communal discernment, like to decide as a congregation if you're going to be reconciling or whatever, right? If you come to different conclusions than the Book of Discipline, are you still Methodist? Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
That's a banner to me. That's a master signifier to me. is you can go through whatever communal process you want as a congregation, but you still have to come to the same conclusions. Agree. Totally agree. Yeah. But I am told on a fairly regular basis that it is the book of discipline that makes us Methodists, so we don't have the right to change the book of discipline. But we do, the conservatives do it with the Constitution, and conservative Methodists do it with the book of discipline. It is an impulse, right, to have something steady in the sea of change when everything's fluid and in liquid definitions, to have something solid.
You open that book and you go down.
Yep.
See, it's right there.
Yep. Paragraph 3, subparagraph 2. Yep. The key to breaking the hold of the enemy-making machine on our lives is to probe what it is about the enemy that creates such fear, jealousy, envy, or even disgust in our own lives. In looking at our enemies, we always learn more about ourselves than about who we fight against. In sitting with them, we open up space for Christ's presence. So this is pretty idealistic. Oh, you like it? Okay, good. I was going to say, but like in Donna's actual week, this is tough to practice. In that conversation that I told you about my friend visiting the family member, it's tough to do. Yeah. So here's the note we'll end on today. This is Fitch's hopeful sort of view of the church that I think is our good landing spot today. The church can only sustain its existence via the enemy-making machine by continually making new enemies, creating more fear and desire for vengeance towards an object. Jesus, on the other hand, challenges his disciples to love their enemies, to be with people. The Apostle Paul urged Christians to weep with those who weep. This is the kind of presence God will use to change the world, but it is ever thwarted by the enemy-making machine. It's only possible by opening up space to be with those we disagree with, trusting Jesus as Lord, and working among us.
I'm glad he gets us.
Yeah, that's a nice paragraph. Wow.
We still get along.
You know, a good exercise might be to be real honest with ourselves. What are we praying about? Who are we praying for? And who are we praying against? Just in an honest confession, and just to say, like, if you were to know the thoughts of my heart, this is how it actually landscapes. This is how it maps. That might be an interesting experiment. Yeah. You know, if we give, and I'm not talking about like celebrities who might be in a cynical way saying things they don't believe. I'm talking about regular people, right, all across North America. If we gave them the benefit of the doubt that they were honestly just seeing this a different way than we were, that would be, right, a first move of generous posture to say, even though we disagree, I'm going to trust that you're trying, right, and that this is, you genuinely just see this differently than I will tell you, I truly thought that the internet and social media that would enable us to see things, because we'd have access to people's different perspectives and even a global perspective, and I truly thought in a utopian way that it was going to fix, and that generationally it was only a matter of time before the old bigotry and prejudice, right, it would eventually just die off.
Light shedding on.
Yes. And that this generation, we would see, because we'd have access to other people's stories and perspectives, and I used to say it was only a matter of time. And now I don't believe in that theory of progress. I don't think anything's only a matter of time, and nothing's inevitable.
But I think I looked at the age group of this.
Yeah. Thank you all for the engagement. Next week, we're going to get into chapter 3, For the Bible Tells Me So. And we're going to talk about what exactly it is that our sacred scripture actually asks of us. It's going to be a good conversation, so I hope you come back.